Nat, how are you doing?
I am doing well.
Wonderful. Rebecca, how are you?
I am also doing well.
Wonderful. I'm glad we are all doing well. So, Natalie, this week we're going over parables. Um, we're going to start with why Jesus spoke in parables and what parables are, and then go into just the first three parables that he covers in Matthew 13, which is the parable of the sower and the seeds with the foresoil. I'm in the parable of the wheat and the tares. I'm in the parable of the mustard seed. So I think the best way to probably do it is to go over what we'll start with you, then we'll go to Rebecca, and then we'll go to me, and we'll just go through all of them that way. You know?
Sounds good.
All right. So having said that, parables. What's a parable, and why did Jesus use them?
Am I going first?
Yeah, but unfortunately, it goes you, then Rebecca, then me.
Shoot.
I
Okay.
know, I know. It's more fun that way.
I have some thoughts. Um, we're gonna go with my first thought first, so I don't lose it. Um, instead of saying what are parables, I'm gonna say my other two thoughts, which are I think one of the reasons that Jesus spoke in parables was to make the people around him think, and so that whoever did think could or could not be held accountable based on whether they truly absorbed what Jesus was telling them. And then I think another thing that's really so important to learn from the parables is oftentimes as Christians, we want to get the message out so much that we tend to just say, oh, believe in Jesus, or, trust Jesus or something like that, when Jesus oftentimes asked questions. And I think that's so important for us to do, to ask questions and really make people think. So things like, where do you get your strength? Why are you, why are you living? What are you living for? Things like that to really make them think like Jesus did as parables. And then a parable is really just um, like a metaphor, I guess. Not really sure what the. I feel like you guys are going to do a much better job describing it, so I'm going to let you guys take that.
No, I think that was really good. How do you feel about it, Rebecca?
For me, parables have always been kind of like, for lack of a better word, the children's story almost. Like when I think of a lot of the times when God was, or not when God, but specifically when Jesus was teaching in the parables and things like that, a lot of times he was teaching them and telling them to a group of people that would have consisted of adults and children. Um, and very much like how children can learn so much from a simple story, is I think a lot of the reasons why they're they're phrased that way. Um, and mostly just because of certain verses that speak to me a lot when it comes to like Jesus and his teachings and stuff throughout the gospel. He talks several times about how important it is to be teaching children and how important that aspect is. Um, and so for me, my answer for that is that he was doing it more or less to teach an entire crowd, knowing that everyone from that crowd is going to get something from it. Because even today, like we were just being silly and singing Disney songs and stuff like that. Like even, you know, kids' movies and things today have jokes for parents and things like that in it, or even life lessons. Like we talk about the kids shows all the time, Bluey specifically, that has a lot of great life lessons for kids, but also parents as well, especially learning from Bluey and Chili, or not Bluey, but Bandit and Chili and everything, who are the parents, obviously. But so that's my take on why it would be, because he had such a diverse crowd listening to him, and this was a way of being able to convey a thought or teach a lesson in which could be perceived by everyone there.
I think that's pretty good. What do you think, Nana?
Amazing. I think that was
I have to get
perfectly
Rebekah to
said.
scoot her butt closer because she's so far away, and I keep trying to get her to scoot closer. But we always have this problem with our audio, but she sits so far away from the microphone. And she's so much quieter than I am.
I wasn't raised.
I think that was a great point, though. And I think that's, why even Jesus calls us sheep and he's our shepherd, because we are his children. And it's kind of what he had to do for us. And in the same way, like you said, we have to do that for our children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. That's my hot take. Go ahead, babe. What's yours?
I think both of those are spot on. I think that's definitely the huge part of it. It makes it digestible for people who have to look into it. It gives it multi-layer. It's multifaceted. I think you guys are both right with both of those things. The other thing that I would point out is that Jesus answers it, because the disciples ask him, like, why do you guys speak, like, why are you speaking in parables, Jesus? Like, what's this about? Like, when you skip down to verse 10 in Matthew 13, it says, and the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to them in parables? And he answered and said, because it was given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it was not given. For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says exactly that, hearing, blah, blah, blah. You skip down to verse 16, and it says, so blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For assuredly I say to you, that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. He further elaborates on it down when you get to verse 34, still in chapter 13 of Matthew. It says, all these things Jesus spoke to the multitudes in parables, and without a parable he did not speak to them, that it might be fulfilled, that which was spoken by the prophet Isaiah, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things kept secret from the foundations of the world. So, he answers why he's doing it. And it is mostly, one, to fulfill prophecy. 2, because it's an easier way for them to digest it. 3, because they are not going to understand the mystery of what he's talking about. And what is the mystery of the thing he's talking about? Well, all of these parables are about the kingdom of heaven. So it's about the kingdom of heaven. And it's not a mystery that a Gentile could be saved. That's in the Old Testament, that a Gentile could be saved. So that's not the mystery. The mystery is found a little bit better in John chapter 12 in verse 37. But you can also find it in Matthew 13:17, Matthew 13:34, Ephesians 3:4. The mystery, the best place is going to be in Ephesians 3:4. And it just points out, that's where Paul's pointing out, that the mystery is that we are joint heirs with Christ by the gospel. And so then the question is, well, what does it mean to be a joint heir? And that's a metakoi, and that's like whatever Christ has inherited in his kingdom, that's what we inherit as well. That's a weird, crazy concept. Now, granted, if it so be that we suffer with him, because it's a different thing to enter the kingdom versus to inherit things in the kingdom and be a joint heir with him. But the mystery of the church and being able to be a joint heir with Christ, according to the gospel, which the gospel Paul also outlines in 1 Corinthians 15:3, about how Christ died for our sins according to the scripture and then was raised according to the scripture. And it's the picture of grace for us. And like I said at last time, grace, my favorite acronym for it is God's riches at Christ's expense. So like you earn everything by nothing you've done, but just simply by the work that he's already completed for us. And so I think that's the mystery of the church, that unfortunately the nation of Israel was blinded in part because they rejected their Messiah. And because they did not realize in that moment that they were rejecting their Messiah, and that was something that God held them accountable for from Daniel, like we covered last time. And so until then, they're not going to get it. So that's why he was speaking in parables, in part was to fulfill prophecy, in part because it's easier to digest, and in part because he was concealing a mystery that they were not going to get. Because, I mean, it's very easy for them, too. Some Jews obviously do convert to Christianity. However, most of the nation of Israel, blindness in part has happened to them because of the hardness of their heart and because they rejected their Messiah. But the other thing I wanted to point out was in John 12:37 and in Matthew 13:13, they both quote from Isaiah. And they quote from Isaiah 42, Isaiah 30 or 53, and Isaiah 6. And in them, Jesus points out that all three of them are written by Isaiah. And what's interesting about that is it's a little bit deep into the waters theologically, and it gets messy. But there are people out there that teach that there's this thing called the Deutero-Isaiah hypothesis in theory. And it says that like Isaiah was written in two separate sections. One ended at Isaiah chapter 40, and the other one carried on throughout the rest of it, and they were written by two different guys. However, if you ever get that deep into the weeds that you're looking into something like that, you can save yourself a lot of time just by reading and seeing that Jesus pointed out in Matthew and in John that Isaiah was written by only one person. So that's cool. Fun little fact that's thrown in there. But why parables? Well, like you both said, it's digestible and it's multifaceted and multi-leveled. Also, it fulfills prophecy, and also because he's revealing things that were concealed that are a mystery. And from this point on in Matthew, he doesn't speak to the congregations unless it's in parables.
Yeah, I think that's all literally perfect. I think that's also a really fun little fact that I didn't know, and that's one of my favorite things about you. And just, I feel like guys in general just know stuff. Like, just fun little facts.
What do I do with you, Nat? Next, we need to jump into the first parable. So, the first parable is the sower and the seeds. It's the easiest one because Jesus goes ahead, and it starts out in Matthew 13, verse 1. That's where we get the sower and the seed. But then, later on, in verse 18, he explains what the sower and the seed is for. So that's kind of the easiest one to go over. So, I want to hear your opinions on it first.
Me?
No, the other you. Yes, you.
Okay, well, this was one of my favorite parables. Just because, again, I feel like as Christians, like I said, we want to tell everybody, especially the new on-fire Christians. And in that, I think we want to just be very careful that, because, like, in the parable of the sower, it talks about how some of the seeds fell on rocky ground and they didn't have much soil. Some of them, the birds came and devoured. And oftentimes we think as new Christians, like, you become a Christian and your life is just easy. Sometimes you get attacked. Sometimes, people aren't going to agree with you, and a lot of people are going to tell you that you're wrong and try and help you out of it. Sometimes, the world's just going to tempt you, and then, it's going to want you to fall right back into where you were. So I think it's very important to keep a solid foundation and really try and set yourself up in a good soil. That's one of my main points. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Fair enough. Rebekah?
Well, this is also one of my favorite parables as well. And as far as it goes, the main things I have to say about this one are just I love all of the different symbolism that comes with it. With each different set of like soil that it is thrown on and everything. So you like going through it. You know, he scattered the seed. Some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no roots. Other seeds fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still, other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. So like obviously, like Natalie said, you know, you hear this and you especially tend to think of yourself, and you know how you don't want to necessarily be that, you know, the soil. You want to be the good soil, so that, you know, when the seeds are falling, that you are, you know, taking that in and then producing good fruit with it and everything afterwards. Another way of looking at it, though, too, is also considering yourself being the farmer, because we are going out and planting seeds as well. And knowing that as you are going out and planting these seeds, you are going to come across times in which, you know, it's not necessarily going to go positively. I think some people, you know, want to go into the ministry, kind of like what you were saying about how, especially with like the Christian faith, you know, you become a Christian and you think everything's going to go great. It's almost the same. You know, you go into the ministry and you think everything's going to go great. That as soon as you go into the ministry, God's just going to make everything work out for you. And there's going to be times when it doesn't work out, and there's going to be times in which, you know, your seed might not necessarily fall on good soil. It doesn't mean that you don't still be a farmer and you don't still continue to go out. Can you please put on a different show for them?
I can't. I'm casting. You have to.
Okay, hold on a second, please. I will change.
Just wait, Esther.
Sorry, Natalie.
You guys are good.
Get in your bed, Assie. I'm changing it to something else. No, you cannot pick. You can go get in your bed. I put on something for you. Okay. She really just wasn't. I was like right about to get to a point there.
When you're in the ministry, you get attacked.
Yes, when you're in the ministry, you're going to get attacked. You know, it doesn't mean that you're not still
Gonna be
a farmer and that you don't still go out and continue to sow your seeds and continue to plant and everything, because there will be times when the seed does fall on good soil, and it does then, like it says, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. And so Charles likes to always point out, who is it, Billy Graham's dad. Billy Graham's dad was just a small church pastor, but yet he was Billy Graham's dad. The most important thing that he did was be a good dad to Billy Graham, who then went out and, you know, produced a harvest of 60 to 30 times what he had sown to begin with. So I think that's just another good point to take away from it, especially it works hand in hand with your own personal Christian life as well as then also transferring into ministry as well. Now it's your turn, babe.
No, I agree with you. That was really good. I'm sorry. I was waiting to see if Nat had any comments. That was really good, though. I agree with both of you.
I think that was really well said.
I'm going to take it from the very top. Hero of men.
Oh, goodness.
I know. Just like to recap on everything, because I feel like we didn't actually do a good enough job of introducing it all, which we should have, but that was probably on me. But I liked everybody's interpretations of it. I just probably should have introduced it first, and that's my bad. So, Matthew chapter 13. Jesus is speaking to the multitudes. Would you keep your little snarky comments to yourself over there? Yeah, you're good. Matthew 13. Jesus is speaking to the multitudes. He's speaking to a bunch of people. And so if you start at the top at verse 1, it says, on the same day, Jesus went out of his house and sat by the sea, and great multitudes were gathered towards him, so that he got into a boat and sat, and the whole multitude sat on the shore. And then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, behold, a sower went out to sow. And then Rebekah already had read the rest of this, but he sowed, and as he sowed, some of the seeds fell by... There's a train coming. This is going to be fun. Should we wait for the train? The train is gone. Anyway. Matthew 13, verse 3. Then he spoke many things to him in parables, saying, behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places, where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up, because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground, and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has an ear, let him hear. Which is a fun one, because that's what he says to all 7 churches in Revelation. Every single one of the times he's talking to a church in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, when he's going over the 7 letters to the 7 churches, he's constantly telling them at the end of it, he who has the ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So, then you skip down to verse 18, and it gets explained. Therefore, hear the parable, and he doesn't explain this to everybody, by the way. This is him just explaining it to everybody else, to his disciples. Therefore, hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received seed by the wayside. But he who received seed by the stony place, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulations or persecutions arise because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now, he who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. But he who receives seed on good ground is he who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100s, some 60s, and some 30s. So, when you're looking at it, you have 4 different types of soil. You have the one that falls on the wayside of the path, one that falls in a stony place, one that falls amongst the thorns, and one that's a good one. Obviously, the one that falls along the wayside gets stolen by the birds. What are birds? Well, it tells you that's the workers of the devil. That's the evil one. That's the enemy. And so, sometimes they snatch it away right away, and it doesn't even take root. Nothing. The second group of people is the ones where it falls on the stony places, and it takes root quickly, but it doesn't actually have any depth. Those are shallow, surface level. As soon as they're persecuted, then they don't want to be Christians anymore. And they're the ones that expect that when you become a Christian, life is going to be easy for you and life is going to get better. The next one is the ones that fall among the thorns. And they have good roots, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches, it chokes them out so that they don't bear fruit. They still have roots down there, but they grow up amongst the thorns. They're tangled in there, and you got to know them by their fruits, so they don't bear much fruit. Then the last one is the one that falls on good ground, and it hears and understands and bears fruit. It has to do all three things, though. And so I think when you look at it, what you come to the conclusion of is that you can. These are all what's called the kingdom parables. Christ is describing what the kingdom of heaven is like. And so the kingdom of heaven is like this. It's like a man who goes out and spreads seed. So that's Christ. That's God. He spreads seed everywhere. What are the seed? The word. So he puts the seed, the word, everywhere. And how we receive it is the different ways that people receive it. The birds, obviously, are the workers of the devil. The thorns are obviously the entanglements of this world. But we are just the plants that grow up. And so some don't even take root at all. They're snatched away. They don't want to hear it. Some, on the other hand, they want to hear it. They like it. They sprout up quick, but they have no depth. And as soon as it gets hard, they're done. And then the other ones, it's not so much that it gets hard and then they're done. It's just that the world is so fun, and there's a lot of money to be made. And even though they had good roots, they're tangled up with all these thorns, and so they're never going to bear any fruit. And then there's the other ones that have to hear and understand, and that's simply just surrendering. And that's how you inherit the kingdom. Because you can still enter, but inheriting is slightly different, as I always try to point out. And you can look at the people's fruit to understand it. But the whole point is that this is just, it's as I always say, it's a platypus, or a metaphor, since Dad didn't know what a platypus was. A platypus, as Phineas and Ferb tells you, is a metaphor. It's all a metaphor for the kingdom of heaven. And so this is a metaphor of what the kingdom of heaven will look like and how it works and how Gentiles work. And so, yeah, I think that's basically the long and short of it. Any thoughts?
I think you really summed and rounded everything up perfectly.
Thoughts? Nothing, Rebekah?
No, I mean, this is one of those pretty straightforward ones.
I know, it's the easy one. That's why I said we'll take the nice slow one down the middle as a warm-up. But we have two more, and they both tie into each other, and they're both fun. I don't know which one's more fun, the tares in the wheat or the mustard seed, but I think they're all going to be pretty fun. Rebekah, would you like to do tares in the wheat first, or would you like Nat?
Oh, goodness.
Because you get tares in the wheat starts in 24 to 30,
No, I
and
know.
it's also explained in 36 to 43. So it's another fun one that's explained for us, so it's not that hard.
I mean, I feel like I don't know, should we still structure this where we give ours and then you do the full thing when you do yours?
Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I like to.
Okay, because
You didn't like the last one?
no, I just didn't know if you wanted to like go over it all first and then hear our opinions on it, because like last time we didn't really explain
Well,
it
no,
first.
but I don't want to, because if I just explain it all, then I explain it all, and then I don't get to hear your guys' opinions.
Okay. So for the parable of the weeds, one of the things that, like, my main opinion on it, which, like, to briefly explain it, is simply that, you don't go and pull up the harvest just because there are weeds amongst it, because you'll pull out the harvest and everything. Which essentially is talking about how, like, you're not going to just, you don't necessarily want to pluck out the bad people, quote unquote bad people, from churches, because with that you could hurt the good people who are there, or, upset people or whatever have you, and then, you could derail your ministry and such. And at least that is how it is typically taught in the church. However, I have not necessarily really experienced this. I feel like even though this is a easy parable and one that is even explained, I don't feel like people necessarily are good at it, if that makes sense. And I mean, I'm saying that, like, being amongst people who are not necessarily good at it as well, because I have a tendency too of kicking somebody out of my life just because they've hurt my feelings, and I could have maybe given that person another chance. Now, granted, I am also accused by many of my friends as being the person who gives people too many chances, but at the same time, I think that's kind of, I feel definitely amongst the church for sure. This, like, in our day and age, we're so fearful of things that could harm people that we will push out people who might not necessarily be harmful just because we fear that they could be. And we're obviously being clearly warned over it here in this parable. That's my opinion. Natalie, take it away.
Am I supposed to be doing the same parable, or?
Yeah, the
You can pair them together. It doesn't matter to me.
or
She
yeah,
can
you
do
could
the mustard.
mustard seed or parable of the weeds.
Mustard seed? Alright, well, with the mustard seed, basically, I think it's all about doing the small things, that turn into big things later. It's all about, I think, with our generation especially, or my generation, we really like instant gratification, and doing big things for show. So if something is like going to the gym, you go to the gym and maybe not everybody sees it, and you may not even see progress for the first few days, but eventually then you're going to be able to move all of this weight because you did something small that maybe not everybody could see right away. And in the same way, with the mustard seed that grew into a big tree, other people can also then see what you have done and come and learn from you and benefit from that as well.
I think that's pretty good. You like that one? Yeah. Alright. So I'll just do both of them over top. And I'll just give you guys my opinion on both, because I think you guys are both pretty spot on, but I have a very different take, because I usually do. But I like what you guys say, and I don't find what you guys say to be incorrect. I think it's very correct. I think that's the advantage to the parables, is that you can get more than one thing out of them. That's the fun thing. You continue to dive deeper into them, and you continue to get more wealth of knowledge out of them. So, with the parable of the wheat and the tares, it starts in verse 24 of chapter 13. Another parable he put forth to the multitudes, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No. Least while you gather them up, the tares, you'll also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but then gather the wheat into the barn. But then he explains that later on in 36, when you skip a few verses down. Then Jesus sent the multitudes away, and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. And he answered them and said to them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom. But the tares, which is like a nasty black thorn, it looks like wheat while it's growing up, and then when it finally grows up, it only difference is a slight variation in color. But if it gets harvested with wheat and you mix it up to make bread with it, it becomes toxic and it makes your belly sick. So it's nasty and it's basically poisonous if you get left inside the wheat. But anyway, let's see here nor there, just a little bit about tares. But the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all the things that offend, and all those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the fiery furnace, and there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth, and the Son in the kingdom of the Father. He who has an ear, let him hear. So that was pretty straightforward when you get to the tares and the wheat. Rebekah kind of nailed it. You're going to have this in your church. You're going to have, as Paul says, where does Paul say it? I believe Paul says it. No, maybe it doesn't say Paul says it. I know that it's said in Acts, but I don't remember who says it in Acts. But they're talking about wolves in sheep's clothing. That are going to come in and not spare the flock. And then again, it happens in Matthew, I want to say earlier, in Matthew 7, they're warning about false prophets that come in and are wolves in sheep's clothing. And so you're constantly having to watch out for that. And so I think that's what he's saying, is that they're going to come in, but you don't want to, like Rebekah said, you don't want to go ripping out tares because you're going to accidentally rip out wheat, because it's going to be a game of he said, she said, and so on and so forth. And so I think Paul does a good job when he says in Romans that if it's at all possible, as much as possible, live peaceably with all men. And he says the same thing to Titus, and he says, listen, avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and strifes and disputes about the law, for such things are unprofitable and worthless. And he warns Timothy in 2 Timothy the same thing, to stay away from foolish and stupid arguments, because you know that they grow into quarrels. And so, we're supposed to be watching out for this. He warns about it in Romans 16. But they're supposed to watch out for divisions, and that there are people who will come into the church and cause divisions and put obstacles in your way. He even points out one dude by name when he's talking to Timothy. He points out Alexander the coppersmith, who did him much harm. And he's like, watch out for that dude. But don't worry, the Lord will repay him according to his deeds. And so I think that's the whole point, is that it's not our job to worry about that. It's our job to just continue to... We can't control what happens to us or how people act. We can only control how we react. And we're just supposed to be wheat, be salt and light, not worry about the tares, watch out for them, and realize that they're going to sneak in. It's funny. There was a pope back in the 1500s, Pope Leo X, who did a whole sermon about how Martin Luther was a boar in God's vineyard, digging up his roots and digging up all his vines and stuff. And it was a wild boar menacing it and destroying it. And the irony was that that's basically what, at the time, the Catholic Church was doing. But at the same time, it has to be a balancing act of realizing that this is going to happen, and then also doing what even the angels do when they're confronted by Satan and say, the Lord rebuke you, it's not supposed to be your job. Now, that doesn't say you're not supposed to check people left and right. You definitely are, but you're not supposed to go ripping out tares. You're definitely supposed to. We're told how to handle church discipline. We're told how you're supposed to deal with people who are unbelievers, so on and so forth. But at the same time, if you rip out a tare, you might accidentally rip out some wheat. So you got to be real careful how you do it. But that goes right into the next one. which is the parable of the mustard seed, which is verse 31 and 32. So with the parable of the mustard seed, it's a lot closer. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it's greater than the herbs, and it becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Okay? Pretty straightforward. So let's take these same principles that we were just using. So the kingdom of heaven, okay, we know what that is. It's like a man that took and sowed a seed in his field. So, who was the sower last time? Well, we just figured it out. That was Christ. But once we look at what he sowed, it's a mustard seed. If you go and look in Jerusalem, and if you look it up in Israel, all across the land, there are these wild mustard plants. And the whole, hillsides will be yellow. But they only grow, maybe 3-4 feet tall. They're not big. They don't grow big. So when you see one that's big, it's weird. It becomes an abomination. So you start saying, it's grown into something unnatural that it wasn't supposed to. And birds come and rest in its branches. But we got from the first parable that birds are always the ministers of Satan. That's the same ones that were trying to snatch up seeds. So it's saying that the kingdom of heaven is like a small little seed that grew into something so big that birds came and rested in its branches. It's just like having tares among your wheat all over again. Now, this one's not explained anywhere else, so I could be wrong about this. But there's also more than one way to take it. You could take it the way you did, and that's how a lot of people take it. They say, if you have a little bit of faith, like a tiny mustard seed, it grows into this big thing. Or the seeds that you plant, like Paul talks about, if one man plants and another man waters, another man harvests, that's one way to take it for sure. And I don't disagree with that. But to me, idiomatically, you start seeing that it looks a little bit more like what happens to the churches throughout time. They become a little bit, every single time it happens. It happened with the early church. The bigger they grow, the more wolves in sheep's clothing come in, the more Alexander the coppersmiths you get, the more birds come and rest inside of its branches. And so to me, I think idiomatically, the parable of the mustard seed has more to do with how this is what happens. Until the end times, when Christ comes back and sorts it out, we're going to continue to have these churches that grow so big that then they fracture. Because wolves in sheep's clothing come in, not sparing the flock. People come in sowing divisive things. You get wolves, to me, that's birds that are coming in and resting in its branches. Some people come in just to take advantage of the tax exemptions or to get the money out of it. Or some people just seek the fame out of it. How many times do you see different pastors or different people throughout history, no matter whether they were Catholic, non-denominational, Methodist, Lutheran, Calvinist, eventually these things grow into a thing that's so big. Even Calvary Chapel grew into a point where it fractured into two separate Calvary Chapels. And you ended up with Calvary Chapel Association and Calvary Global Network. So, I think eventually you get birds that come and rest in the branches. And to me, that's what the parable of the mustard seed's about.
Perfect. I mean, I think it's so cool how, like you said, you get something different every time you read it, and you can just keep getting deeper and deeper with it.
Yeah, and you can take it different directions too. And like I said, I think you find that, not just with the parables, but I think you find that a lot in the book of John, that you could read it as a new Christian and get what it's getting at, and you could read it as somebody who is a theologian, and you're still going to get new things out of it every time. And I think that's why it's a lot of people's favorite one to start people on, and also their favorite one to go back to. For me personally, it's not my favorite one, but I'm different. I'm just give me the facts. I like Mark. Just give me the facts, man. But having said that, the parables, I get where you're coming from with them, and I think that's part of the reason I wanted to hear your guys' opinion first, because I think it does paint a more well-rounded picture of it, I think that's kind of the whole purpose of, like, the body and how, like, we're all process things differently. If we were all heads or all hearts or all hands or all feet, it would be a different picture. You wouldn't get the full picture of what God is and what he's trying to express.
Well, exactly. That's why it's important to be in community and talk about these things.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why it's also important for, like, people to not be afraid to share their opinions on it either, you know? Like, you don't have to be right, but how else are you going to know, you know? And you might have something that someone else doesn't know.
Exactly. Or just never thought about.
Yeah. Like, for instance, like, who would have known that the time of figs is not yet?
Not the figs.
I just need one more week.
I mean, it goes back to, again, why we said, why did he speak in parables? And he obviously reveals his secrets of the kingdom of heaven to those who are willing to receive it and hear it. And I think that's kind of like you said, Nat, you come back to it, read it again, and you can get something completely different. And usually it's because that's what you're needing to hear at that time.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, I think that's what Paul says in Romans 10:17, that faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of God.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any questions, Nat? You sound like you're getting tired.
I actually really don't have any questions.
I figured this was going to be a good, easy one to start out with, because these are a little bit easier parables. We get into more hard ones as this goes on, and then eventually we get into the so-called problem parables, which, like, are very, very fun, like the shrewd manager and stuff. And those ones people have a lot more opinions on. But these ones are fairly straightforward. I thought the only one that the three of us would have a different opinion on was probably going to be the mustard seed. But I figured the first two we'd both be on the same, or all three be on the same page, you know?
Yeah.
But having said that, I think that's all I really wanted to get at tonight. What about you, Rebekah?
That sounds good to me.
And Nat?
I think that's it.
Alright, so next time we'll pick up with the next couple of parables, which should be fairly fun. The next one is going to be the woman and leaven, and then the treasure in the field, and then the pearl of great price. The treasure in the field and the pearl of great price are very, very fun. They're two of my favorite ones. So this should be fun. Yeah. Alright. I think that ends everything for now. Anything else? We good? We're all good? Alright. Say goodnight, Nat.
Good night.
Love you.
Love you.
Bye-bye.